Hi, in this video we are going to talk about AWS Amazon S3. S3, which is Simple Storage Service, which is a managed service of Amazon Web Services. We are going to talk about the high level introduction, what are the key features, what is S3 in its essence, what are the key concepts, costing, pricing, how to use them, and then we are going to go through a demo. We are going to completely look at all the operations that you can perform on buckets, objects, creating and listing buckets, deleting, moving around objects, copying objects, and various other features that S3 offers. So let's get started. So what is S3? S3, that is Simple Storage Service. S3 is an object storage service. Object storage service basically means that you can store unlimited amount of data in Amazon's S3. It's a managed service. So if you want to store any kind of data, any kind of files, videos, images, or any kind of data, even code, if you want to store, you can store it in Amazon S3. S3 is highly scalable, available, durable, and secure. S3 is famously, in one of the videos that I have spoken about, has famously 11.9 durability when we created the video. So 11.9 means that it is very rare that you will any time, probably if you have 10,000 objects in a bucket, you will lose one object in a million years. So that's a durability for S3, and it is highly secure. And it offers various use cases, like you can create data lakes, you can host websites for mobile applications, backup and restore, archival, analytics, and so on and so forth. So S3 is one of the main services of Amazon Web Service and one of the most successful services. It has been around for a long time. So what are the features of Amazon S3? So Amazon S3 offers various features for various use cases. Like for example, the first one is storage classes, right? So there are different types of storage classes that are designed for different use cases. For example, say if you are having a mission critical production data that you are frequently accessing, right? So you can use S3 standard class, right? Or say if you have archival use cases, you can use S3 Glacier, right? So there are various storage classes. The next feature is storage management, right? So S3 has storage management features that you can use to manage costs, meet regulatory requirements, reduce latency. So there are various storage management features, like for example, S3 replication, right? You can replicate objects and their respective metadata and tags to one or more destination buckets, right? Another storage management feature is S3 lifecycle. So lifecycle, basically you can configure a lifecycle policy to manage your objects, and you can also set an expiration, right? After the lifecycle ends, you can also expire the objects. So there are various storage management features. Next is access control. So access control, like is obviously one of the most critical things. How do you access buckets? How do you allow users to access buckets and objects? So that can be done like using various like bucket policies you can apply, or you can apply IAM roles, which is identity and access management roles, users policies, right? You can also provide access points. So there are various features to control access to your buckets and objects. The next feature is data processing. So a variety of data processing activities are possible, right? For example, say if you are copying an object to an S3 bucket, and then once the object is copied, you want to trigger a Lambda, so to create an event based notification mechanism, right? You can do that using S3 object Lambda. So there are various data processing capabilities also and features also provided by S3. Next feature that we are going to talk about is logging and monitoring. So Amazon S3 provides logging and monitoring tools that you can use to monitor and control how your Amazon S3 resources are being used, right? Using say CloudWatch metrics or CloudTrail or access logs. So you can and provide various graphs and metrics like that, alarms. So S3 provides various logging and monitoring tools. And the last but not the least is analytics and insights, right? So S3 offers features that can help you gain visibility into your storage usage, which basically gives you a better understanding of how your storage is being used, to better analyze, to better optimize your storage when you are operating at scale. So and there are multiple other features also, but these are the primary features of Amazon S3. So next, let's see how will we access S3, right? So you have a user and you have Amazon web services and you have a S3 bucket and objects, but how will users access the bucket? There are primarily few ways to access the bucket. The first way is AWS Management Console. Management console is basically the UI, the GUI through which you can manually operate, create bucket, upload objects, delete objects, view them, list them. So you can operate from them AWS Management Console, which is the UI. The next is the command line interface, AWS CLI, which is the AWS provides a command line interface where you can basically input commands to provide operations or to run operations to create a bucket, to upload an object, right? But one of the most used is the third category, which is AWS SDKs, right? SDKs are the software development kits, and AWS provides SDKs for S3 in various languages like Java, Python, Go, various languages that are supported. And when you are building an application which is multi-scale, which is a distributed application, it is difficult to actually manage through UI or through at times CLI also, unless you are writing some script, right? So most of the time when you are building an application, you will mostly using the AWS SDKs. AWS also provides S3 REST HTTP endpoints, which can also be used directly to access S3 objects. That is also one more option that can be used. Next, let's go to some of the core concepts of S3, right? Whenever you are working with S3, there are some core concepts that you should know about whenever you are working with S3. The first one is obviously buckets. We have been talking about buckets. Bucket, how do you think of bucket? Bucket is a container for objects. So basically it's a repository where all objects are placed. You can always put objects within a bucket, right? The next is objects. Obviously these are the main entities that has to be stored, which can be a file, an image, video, a document, anything that you want, you can actually store, and that is unlimited amount of storage, like almost like it you can store anything inside a bucket. The next concept is keys. Keys are the unique object identifier in a bucket, right? So basically whenever you are creating a bucket, you are then uploading an object inside the bucket, you have to access that object, right? Obviously you can go there and manually access it, but if you are implementing an application where you have to access an object that is uploaded, say a photo or something, then you basically access those using the unique keys, which are the unique identifiers. So before moving forward, let's look at a sample scenario, right? So let's say that we have a bucket, right? And now we have put some objects inside the bucket. So we have a bucket with objects, right? And say this bucket with objects is created in AWS region US West 2, right? So it is in one of the regions that you have created the buckets, and there the bucket has objects. How do you access the objects? To access the objects, you can use something like, for every object there is a unique URI that is created, which is something like this. You can actually access the bucket by https:/bucket.s3.us2.amazonaws.com/object, right? And that object itself can also have like directories and directories internally, and then ultimately a file. So which is where the bucket is the top level container, and everything inside that you are creating, which can be folders also and which can be other files and documents also, will be accessed via this kind of a URL, right? Next, look at bucket policy. So bucket policy is one of the core concepts because it actually gives you the resource based policy for access permissions to your buckets and objects, right? So that is an important feature if you want to grant access or deny access, like we saw in the previous slide how S3 provides access control. So bucket policy is one of the ways to provide access control, right? So that is bucket policy. And next, another concept is versioning. Versioning is basically you can store and retrieve multiple variants of the same object in the same bucket, right? So and whenever you are creating a version of an object, you will have a version ID, so you can retrieve various versions of the object from the same bucket at any point of time. So versioning is also a core concept that you should be aware of. There are various other features also, like I mentioned, like lifecycle auditing, monitoring. But whenever you are dealing and working and implementing with objects and buckets and keys and bucket policies, versioning, so those are some of the core concepts that you should be aware of. Next, let's look at cost. Obviously, whenever you are using S3, it's a managed service, so you'll have to pay something, but you only pay for what you use, right? There are no hidden fees. So S3 is automatically included in your AWS account. So whenever you are creating an AWS account, you already get S3 with it. So you don't have to do any kind of provisioning or any kind of separate setup to use S3. S3 is already there. But I would recommend that always start with the free tier. right? S3 provides a free tier of, I think, some GB. You have to check that what is the current amount whenever you're doing that, but always start with the free tier. And if you're just using that for, say, a tutorial purpose or just learning or even building a very small kind of an application to learn, free tier should suffice. And if you're using the free tier, then basically you are creating the account and using S3 without any cost. You don't have to pay anything. But obviously, if you go beyond the free tier, the amount of usage that you do, that is the amount that you pay. You don't have to pay in traditional on-prem solutions. If you are in any in our local day-to-day lives also, if you have to store something, say in a hard drive, right, or in a pen drive or somewhere, you obviously have to pay that storage. Like if you are buying a 1 TB hard drive, you already pay that whether you are using that 1 TB or not, right? So that is, if you are using only 100 GB out of the 1 TB, you still are actually paying for the 900 GB cost upfront, right? But that is where S3 is useful, which is as a pay as you go model, right? So if you are within the free tier, you basically don't pay anything. So that's the cost. Now let's jump directly into the demo, and I'm going to show you how to create the buckets, how to create objects, and we are going to run through various from the management console, all the various features that S3 provides, and we are going to run various operations on each of the buckets, objects, life cycles, and all those things. So let's go to the demo. Okay, so I am in the management console, AWS management console. When you log into your AWS account, this is what the account looks like. This is the landing page of AWS management console. You can go to S3. I have already visited S3, so it is showing up in the recently visited services, or you can also search from here. So if I search for S3, I'll be getting S3. So I can go from there also. So if I go to S3, currently I don't have anything in S3. So let's start by creating a bucket. We can click on this orange button that you can see here, create bucket. We can click on this button. Let's give a bucket name, SoftwareDude. We are going to choose the region Oregon. We have object ownership, like how do you access the objects. We are not going to provide any access control list as of now, but you can do that if needed. We are going to block all public access for this bucket. So we have checked, this is already checked by default. You can enable bucket versioning. By default it is disabled, but versioning is that you can obviously have multiple versions of the same variant of the object. But we are not going to enable versioning right now, but you can do if needed. You can also set up encryption, server-side encryption. Right now by default it is disabled, but you can enable server-side encryption, which means that automatically all the objects in the bucket will be encrypted, right? And in the advanced setting, we'll see that there is an object lock. You can also put object locks. Like we mentioned, these are some of the features that S3 provides at the bucket level. But we are going to go ahead with the default setting that we have. So let's click on the create button, create bucket button, and so our bucket is created, right? So if you notice that this bucket is the top level container, right? We cannot actually update or include a file here. This is the repository. Now if we have to upload an object, we have to go inside this bucket and then we can upload an object, right? Or we can create a folder inside this, inside which we can create an object. So let's actually create a folder here. So a test folder, server-side encryption we are going to do as disabled. Now this is my folder within my bucket SoftwareDude, right? And then inside this folder, I can now upload an object. So if I upload an object, I can actually click on that upload object and add files. So there are multiple ways to do. Let me just drag and drop a file. Right. So hello world.doc is the document that I am uploading. Right. So let me select this and permissions. I'm not going to give any permissions. That's fine. It is granted for whoever is the account owner. Properties, you can set up properties. We had mentioned about storage classes. So these are all the storage classes that you want. So we are going ahead with the standard storage class. If you have to access the data frequently, they are intelligent tiering, standard IA, one zone IA, glacier, instant retrieval. They are archival use cases, reduced latency use cases. So various storage classes are there. We are going to go ahead with the standard one. We're not going to specify any encryption key because we are not enabling server-side encryption. You can also provide additional checksums. You can add tags, metadata. but let's go ahead and upload the document. The document is uploaded, right? And you can see that the document, this document, if I go inside this object, so this in S3's world, this is an object. If I go inside this object, this is the object that is created with all the metadata. So let's look at what are the things that are here, right? So the first thing here is the URI. Remember the URI that we mentioned, SoftwareDude your bucket, and everything after that is the object, right? So for this, it becomes the unique key for this object, and whenever you are creating an object, you will also get a ARN, that is an Amazon resource name for every object that you are creating, right? So that is how we can create an object, like we can enable or upload an object. Now let's go to permissions. So this is where you can actually provide permissions for this object, like who are the object owners, like who can access this. We have given read and read write access only to the object owner. We have blocked public access. You can see that there is no object and object access, and there are no authenticated user groups. If you want, you can set those up, right? And then there are versions. We haven't enabled versioning, like SoftwareDude doesn't have bucket versioning enabled. But if you are versioning, then you can have the multiple copies of the same, multiple variants of the same object in the same bucket, right? So this is the object that we uploaded. Let's go back to our and now if you can also download the object. So if you want to download the object or open it, we can click on this and this is going to download the object, right? And if we click on this, it will directly open whatever object that is. So it's a hello world object. Okay. So now let's go to the test folder and go to another at the top level buckets. Let's create another bucket. Okay. So let's say SoftwareDude 1. Okay, we are going to keep the same configurations that are there by default. The thing that I want to show you guys is how to move around objects. So if I want to copy or move the object, so how will I do? So you see there are multiple options that you get with this object. You can delete the object that we are going to do in few minutes, but let's look at all the actions that are there. The actions are the, like, you can obviously download, you can share a pre-signed URL, you can calculate total size, all those things are fine. You can rename, edit the object storage class, edit all the settings like server side encryption, metadata tags. But if you want to move or copy, you can do that by selecting one of those two options. So let's do a copy, right? If we have to copy, we can directly copy it to another S3 bucket, right? So that is where we're going to browse, choose destination. So let's go here, let's select the new bucket that we have created and let's choose this destination. Okay, and once we have selected that, let's copy it. Okay, so this is successfully copied, right? 19 KB. So let's go back to our S3 folder and let's go back to our top level buckets. So SoftwareDude should also have this file. So that is how you can copy the files, right? So now let's look at how we can, so you can also see that you can see a list of all the buckets that are there. You can view independent objects. All those are options that are possible. But now let's go inside the bucket and let's look at various options that a bucket has. We have looked at the options that a object has, but a bucket has much more options and properties. First thing is, yes, properties. We have looked at bucket versioning, encryption, intelligent tiering configuration, service side logging, outer access data, like if you want to know about who is accessing what kind of data. So all those things can be achieved. So those are various properties. Then there is permissions. Permissions are who can access this bucket. Currently, like I mentioned, and you can provide permissions via various ways, like we mentioned, like public access is blocked. One of the things that we noticed during the slides was bucket policy, where you can primarily provide a policy who can view, write, read in this bucket, right? Then you can also provide object ownership. Object ownership, whoever is the bucket owner and the object owner will by default have it, but you can also add that. You can provide different access control lists, which are more granular level control, access control mechanisms. You can also provide cross-region resource sharing. So currently, remember, all these documents are and the bucket is created in US West 2. So if you want to do a cross region use case, right, if you want to do a US East 1 like IID, in that case we can do that, and for that you have to provide the cross region configuration, right? So these are all the permissions that you can enable. You get a host of metrics. So these metrics are the metrics that are important when you want to monitor your bucket, audit your bucket. What are the data that are being produced? What is the total bucket size? What are the number of objects? These are data based on which you will get charged, right? So if you are within the free tier, then you won't get charged anything. But if you are not within the free tier, if you have exceeded that, then these are metrics that should always be monitored, so that you know what is the usage of these buckets and objects that you are creating in the bucket. Management, we had discussed management, one of the primary things we have discussed, both of these, like life cycle rules. You can create life cycle rules of objects, can maintain them throughout the life cycle, and also set up expiry. Replication rules, you can replicate all these objects to a new bucket. There are various inventory configurations also. So these are some of the storage management options that you get. And then there are access points. These are also a mechanism, kind of an access, which simplifies the managing data at scale, right, across whenever you are sharing data across S3. So that is another way of accessing objects. So these are various properties and features from a bucket perspective. Now let's look at the operations where we are deleting a bucket. So remember, both of these buckets have objects in them. So let's try to delete the bucket. This bucket is not empty, right? So this is a mechanism that Amazon S3 by default puts. If you already have an object, it will not allow you to delete it. You cannot actually allow you to delete it. If you have to do that, then you have to configure empty bucket configurations and all those things. So which is where we have to cancel this. We have to go inside the bucket, delete the object first, or whatever is there inside the bucket. So let's delete this. If you want to delete this, you have to there are a couple of things that S3 confirms here. One thing is, they will ask you whether you want to actually delete. Now, they are not only do they ask you, they also ask you to provide this permanently delete thing. Only then it will get activated, so that it's not a robot, right? You are actually doing it consciously. So you can delete the object, and the object is deleted. Now let's go back to the bucket, and now let's try to delete the bucket. So we have selected the bucket. Let's try to delete the bucket. Now it is allowing us to delete the bucket. If you are deleting the bucket, you have to enter the name of the bucket. So let's give that, and only then the button will get enabled. Let's delete the bucket. So the bucket is now deleted, right? Similarly, you can also delete folders within a bucket. So if you want to do that, you can do that. Now remember, folders inside buckets and everything within that are all, at the end of the day, keys and objects. So whenever you are deleting that object, remember, they are not going to ask you about the object. It can delete the entire folder. That is possible, but you cannot delete the entire bucket. So that is the difference between a bucket and a folder, if you had some confusion. But that is basically it, a basic high-level overview of how S3 works, how to access their various properties, management and storage classes and features and access control that are provided by S3. Hopefully this was useful.